Hi everyone. In this second video about the skeletal system, we are going to discuss in detail the structure of the long bones, as well as the way the soft tissues in the body are converted into calcified bone tissues, or the process of ossification, which is the transformation of a soft tissue into a hard calcified tissue, which is the bone. In this slide, we're going to start by the structure of a long bone. As we said before, a long bone is a bone whose length is more than its width, even if that bone is short, like the bones of the phalanges. So it's not related to how long the bone is, but it is rather related to the fact that the length of the bone is greater than the width. As you can see here, we have a long bone, and at the two ends of the long bones, we have what we call the epiphyses. This swollen part is called the epiphyses, and we will see this on another diagram, whereas the part in between, or the shaft of the bone, is called the diaphyses. And if this is a typical long bone, then we will see in the cross section of the bone that we have several layers. The outermost layer, denoted here as compact bone, is called compact because it is densely calcified. It contains calcium and phosphorus, or calcium phosphate salts, in a huge amount, so that the tissue is highly and densely calcified, and therefore it is compact, not only because it is densely calcified, but also because there are no white spaces inside. Following the compact bone, we have the spongy bone. The spongy bone is so called because it's porous, or it has spaces in between the bone layers, and the bone layers are interlacing or intersecting with each other, and we call them the trabeculae. Trabeculae is the plural of trabecula, and the trabecula is that bone layer that is interlacing with another bone layer. In the spaces of the spongy bone, or the cancellous bone, we will see the bone marrow. As you know, there are stem cells that start forming blood, and as we said in the first video, this is hematopoietic tissue. Here you can see on both sides different types of bone marrow. So here, for example, in the epiphyses, or the ends of the bones, you can see that the spongy bone spaces are filled with blood cells, and therefore it's called red bone marrow. But inside the shaft, and as you grow older, this red bone marrow, as we said in the previous video, will be full of fat cells that deposit inside. The deposition of the fat cells will convert the red bone marrow into yellow bone marrow. And in case it forms a yellow bone marrow, we will find that there will be remodeling of the spongy bone, so that it can leave a cylindrical hollow part inside where the fat cells will deposit. So you will not only find the fatty bone marrow in the spaces, in the scattered small spaces of the spongy bone in between the trabeculae, but you will also find it in a hollow cylindrical part, central part of the bone. And you can see this easily when you break down, or you break down the shaft of a long bone into two, and you look inside, especially if the long bone belongs to a cow or to a larger animal, not to chicken, for example, and you will find inside a very discrete and well-specified cylindrical fatty tissue, which is the yellow bone marrow. And we said before that the yellow bone marrow can be reconverted into, the yellow bone marrow, yes, can resume its function of forming blood cells and therefore be converted into red bone marrow in emergency conditions when your body has lost a good deal of blood. So we have an outer compact layer, which is the compact bone, and then the spongy bone. But before leaving that diagram, we will find that outside the compact bone, there is a tough tissue, fibrous tissue, connective tissue, but rich in fibers like collagen and elastin, and it is tough to protect the bone and also to provide attachment to the muscles, because as we said before, the tendons of the muscles pull onto the bones, they do not push. So the periosteum has to be tough and resistant in order not to be torn when the muscle pulls on it. You can also see that inside the periosteum and inside the bone itself, as we will see later on with further microscopic magnification, that there are blood vessels, there are arteries, and there are veins. And this tells you that the bone marrow is a living tissue, because sometimes when we look at the bone and how hard it is, we have the impression that it is a dead tissue and that it does not contain blood vessels, like, for example, the enamel of the teeth or the outer layer of the teeth. But here, no, the bone is a living tissue. So the bone surface is covered by a tough membrane, and that tough membrane is called the periosteum. So what is the periosteum? It's a tough membrane that covers the bone from outside. So the periosteum is a membrane that covers the outer surface of the bone, except at the joints. Here, you know from the previous video that the joint is the site where a bone, the end of a bone, meets with the end of another bone. So imagine we have another bone here. So this site where the two bony ends meet together is called a joint. At that place, you will not find the periosteum, but you will find something else, which is the cartilage. The cartilage is something that's similar to the bone, as we will see later on, but the cells inside do not lay down or deposit calcium. So it is rather rubbery and flexible and very smooth. And this is very convenient to the location of the cartilage, because if the cartilage is covering the ends of the bones at the joint, and at the joint, you know that most of the joints are mobile and movable, then there would be friction of the two bone ends over each other when they move onto each other. But the presence of a smooth cartilage on the bony ends will prevent friction and will protect the bone. If the cartilage, of course, is worn or torn out, then there would be severe pain because of the friction and the inflammation that occurs. The periosteum contains, as we said, a network of blood vessels. And these blood vessels are not here only to supply the periosteum as usual with oxygen and glucose for energy, but they also penetrate inside the bone to supply the inside of the bone with oxygen and nutrients for energy, but also for another very important thing, which is to supply the bone with stem cells, because the stem cells are present in the blood. They penetrate into the bony, the model, the soft tissue model that the body forms for the bone, and those stem cells gradually form bone cells like osteocytes, and those bone cells will deposit calcium. But the periosteum, any living tissue, needs blood vessels, as you know, arteries to provide oxygen and glucose, veins to carry away the waste, but it also needs nerves, because a living tissue has to be protected by sensation. If you do not feel any the tissue is not supplied by nerves, then any injury would not be recognized or identified by the human body, and therefore there wouldn't be the necessary response for healing. Just like we have the periosteum on the outer side of the bone, we have on the inner side of the bone lining the compact bone, we have the endosteum, and the endosteum lines the bone marrow cavity from the inside. So as I've just said, just under the periosteum, we have a hard material that is called the compact bone. The compact bone is a thick layer, and it is a rather hard, solid layer. And this is very important. This is one example of structure function adaptation. You're frequently asked about this, how the structure serves the function, or how the structure is adapted to the function. So the presence of the compact bone will help the bone withstand or endure the large amount of stress that the bone is subjected to. For example, when you jump in the air upward and then you descend on the floor, this is one example of severe stress and pressure on the bone. So the bone has to be hard enough to support this stress. Now we come to a more sophisticated and detailed structure of the bone. Here we imagine that we have like divided the shaft of the bone into two. And therefore you can see the periosteum that is not labeled here, a layer of compact bone, and then the bone marrow cavity or medullary cavity. And then inside you have the endosteum. So here the endosteum is labeled, but the periosteum is not. And then you have the blood vessels, arteries, veins, and also the nerves running inside the medullary cavity, the bone marrow cavity. And as you can see, they are connected with the blood vessels of the periosteum because they actually come from there. Here in this diagram, what we have done is that we have cut a wedge-shaped structure or a triangular part of the bone. And therefore, if you cut a triangular part here, you will see in the central part, you will see the blood vessels. Here you can see the artery and the vein. And here is the wedge-shaped part of the bone we have cut. So the part we have cut is mainly compact bone, as you can see, and only a very small layer of spongy bone. The main difference, as you can see, between the compact bone and the spongy bone is not in the composition, but in the presence or absence of spaces. So here we have plenty of spaces, and this is normal because the spongy bone is very close to the bone marrow. So it has to enclose spaces to contain hematopoietic cells. But the main function of the compact bone is not to form blood cells or to store blood cells, but to give endurance to the bone. As you can see, the blood vessels penetrate inside. And this diagram shows you what? Shows you that if you focus onto the structure of the compact bone, you will find that the compact bone is made of units. These cylindrical units contain each cylindrical unit, which is called the Haversian system. The Haversian system is the individual cylindrical unit, contains in the center a central canal, which is called the osteonic canal, and it contains blood vessels and nerves. This means that those blood vessels, the central arteries and veins in the bone marrow of the bone as a whole, will be branched into arteries that run in the central part of the Haversian system or the cylindrical unit. So the compact bone again is made of cylindrical units. As you can see, this is one cylindrical unit, but it has been cut into two halves because of the section. But this is a whole cylindrical unit. We have raised it upward to show you how it is cylindrical and how it has a central canal. This osteonic canal, osteonic canal is not a famous name for that canal. We usually call it a Haversian canal. So the whole unit is called Haversian system, and here we have the Haversian canal. As you can see, there are like collateral communications between the central canals or the Haversian canals, and we call them, they are rather oblique and they are transverse and they connect the Haversian canals together. We call them the perforating canals. If we look at this part of the compact bone and enlarge it, we will find that those densely calcified bone structures are formed or contain mature or immature bone cells. Here, they are mature because they are called osteocytes. The immature ones are called osteoblasts. And if they are osteocytes, then one of their functions is to lay down calcium and phosphorus in the soft tissue around, or the matrix around, that is essentially made of proteins, and which we call the osteoid tissue. So what is the osteoid tissue? The osteoid tissue is the soft tissue in between the bone cells, in which the bone cells will lay down or deposit calcium and phosphorus to make this osteoid tissue mineralized and become bone tissue. But as you can see, the osteocytes lie inside pockets or spaces that where they can fit, called canaliculi. Canaliculus is a small canal, and you can see that those canaliculi are interconnecting. And you can also see that the osteocytes have extensions, they have processes, and therefore it's good that the canaliculi are branched so that the processes or the extensions of the osteocytes can have space to fit in, and the osteocytes can join each other. But as time passes, this deposition of calcium around the osteocytes will imprison them, and they might die because of being imprisoned. The lacuna is the space where the osteocyte is present, and the canaliculus is the extension of that space. And here, if you enlarge under the microscope, you can see the osteocytes. These red small structures are the osteocytes under the microscope. Here again, we have enlarged and enlarged to see one Haversian system, and that Haversian system or osteon. So every one of these cylindrical structures, of course, in the cross section, they will not appear cylindrical unless you pull one of them, which is, of course, not easy to do. But hypothetically, if we pull it like we did in the diagram, then this structure is called the Haversian system or the osteon. And the osteon is made of layers of bone, as you can see. And these layers have been formed by the osteocytes, that because the arrangement of the osteocytes in the Haversian system is cylindrical. They are arranged in concentric layers. Concentric means circular layers that all have one center. So this layer, and this layer are all concentric layers having one center, or they are concentric lamellae. So what are the lamellae? They are the layers of bone tissue that have been formed by the osteocytes. So here we have the circumferential lamellae or the concentric lamellae. And here you can see inside, of course, this is the Haversian canal. In the center of each Haversian system, we have a Haversian canal. But this large cavity that appears in the longitudinal section of the bone is the main bone marrow cavity, or medullary cavity, and therefore we can see just outside the spongy bone, and even the bone marrow spaces themselves that are filled with blood are nothing but spongy bone or cancellous bone spaces. So actually, especially, it's easy to understand, especially when the bone marrow is still red bone marrow, then all the spaces of the cancellous bone or spongy bone will contain hematopoietic tissue and blood cells. And outside, we will have surrounding this the compact bone. But as we said before, as you grow older, this will become yellow bone marrow. And if it becomes yellow bone marrow, then the spongy bone will be confined to the periphery, and there will be a hollow central part that will be filled with fat. And here we can see the same. We can see the central canal with the blood vessels. We can see the osteocytes with the lacunae. We can see the canaliculi, and we can see the lamellae of bone. This is the diagram, and this is the real picture under the microscope. So in the cross section, we're going to wrap up what we said, or to recapitulate what we said. In the cross section, the compact bone is composed of cylinders, and those cylinders or concentric lamellae contain mineral crystals, but those mineral crystals have been deposited into the osteoid tissue. And the osteoid tissue is nothing but soft connective tissue that is full of protein fibers like elastin and collagen. And those concentric layers or circumferential layers are called the lamellae. So the lamellae are mineralized concentric layers of what? Of collagen matrix. The matrix is the soft tissue where we are going to deposit the minerals. In the center, we have a narrow channel, as we said, that is called the Haversian canal, and the blood vessels run into the Haversian canal, but they can also run through the interconnected Haversian canals, the oblique transverse canals that connect the Haversian systems together, and they are, of course, responsible for nourishment. And when we say nourishment, we mean supplying with glucose and oxygen in order to allow the tissues to break down glucose during aerobic respiration and extract the energy. And of course, we have several layers or several lamellae, those layers of calcified protein fibers. But here, the slide talks about the very initial parts, the very initial stages when the matrix is still non-calcified, because we will be talking about ossification or calcification after this. Embedded within the gaps of those protein lamellae, because those protein lamellae intentionally leave spaces or gaps, which are called the lacunae. And inside those lacunae, as we said before, we have the mature bone cells. But underneath of the compact bone, we have a connective tissue that is also calcified. But as I said before, a couple of minutes ago, that this connective tissue that is calcified is called spongy bone or cancellous bone because it is full of spaces. Although the name suggests that it's a weak type of bone because it contains spaces, yet it's not at all soft or weak, but it is hard and strong. And it has the same structure of the compact bone, but the difference is that it is deposited in the form of a lattice or a network, of bony spikes or trabeculae. The trabeculae are the layers of spongy bone that interlace or intersect with each other and that leave spaces in between. It's interesting to know that the arrangement of those trabeculae and how they interconnect with each other and how they intersect with each other is not fixed, but it differs according to the external stimuli or pressures that are applied to the bone. So that if you you do a certain type of muscular exercise, and according to the weight distribution and the center of gravity of your body and the movements you are carrying out, there are certain points of the bone that are known to withstand more pressure than the others, and therefore, along those points of pressure, we will find more trabeculae. But the presence of the spaces helps the bone be lighter. The bone marrow, as we said, it includes all the cavities, whether they are in the form of one cylindrical cavity, like in case of the yellow bone marrow, or many interconnecting cavities. It's a soft tissue, and it can be red or yellow, as we said before. And the red bone marrow is found in between the cavities of the spongy bones, as I have just said. Where is it present? Why are we asking where it is present? Bone marrow is supposed to be present in all the bones, yes, but here when we say where, we mean where it will persist, where it will stay red bone marrow even when you grow older. So it is present in the ends of the long bones or the epiphyses, in the ribs, which are flat bones, in the vertebrae, which are also considered flat bones, in the sternum, which is a flat bone, and in the pelvis. The pelvis is mainly a flat bone. The pelvic bone as a whole is considered as an irregular bone, but the ilium, the posterior part, is considered a flat bone. Those are the areas where the red bone marrow persists, and they are mostly, with the exception of the heads of the long bones, they are mostly flat bones. So here you can see the epiphysis, or the head of the bone. This is a real picture which contains the spongy bone and you can see that there is no central cavity with the fat. It's all spongy bone, and the cavities contain blood. Gradually, the central parts, here is the red bone marrow. We can see how the spongy bone contains or encloses the red bone marrow, but gradually the central parts convert into yellow bone marrow. The yellow bone marrow fills the shaft of the bone, the shaft which is called the diaphysis, diaphysis, and it consists mostly of fat cells, and the fat cells serve as energy reserves for the body, but as I've just said, it can be converted to red bone marrow if there is severe loss. We will stop here, and then you will be receiving another video discussing the injuries and the fractures that occur in the bones. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you enjoyed it, please like the video, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel in order to allow this information, if you find it useful, to reach the largest possible number of students and people who are interested. Thank you, and see you on the next video.